The five friends arrived at the small, overgrown island, their faces full of excitement. Arjun led the group with his backpack swung with every step as he looked around. Priya, she walked beside him. She asked,
"Remember when we came here as kids?"
her eyes shining with memories. Nisha skipped over the rocks in her sandals.
"I bet you can't even set up the tent without help."
His muscles and started setting up the tent near the campsite.
Watch and learn.
Kiran, always curious, wandered off to explore the rocky shore.
This place hasn't changed much.
And thick trees. The island seemed peaceful, with the sound of waves crashing softly against the rocks. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow through the trees, making everything look magical. The campsite had old wooden benches, covered in moss, and a fire pit that hadn't been used in years. But, as the friends laughed and shared their memories, none of them noticed the strange rustling deep in the forest. Something was watching them. Giving up, he turned it off with a tired sigh and pulled the hood of his grey sweatshirt over his head, relaxing into sleep. As the island grew darker, the soft glow from their lanterns inside the tents flickered. The warmth of the campfire faded, and the silence felt heavier, as if the island itself was watching them. It was early morning, and the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the campsite with a soft orange glow. But something felt wrong. The trees, once peaceful, now seemed darker, their long shadows stretching over the ground. Arjun paced near Varun's tent, his face tight with worry. He looked around in disbelief, his brow furrowed. Priya sat on the ground, hugging her knees. Her face was pale, and her eyes, wide with fear, kept darting to the empty tent. She bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. Nisha paced by the campfire, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes nervously scanned the forest, expecting something, anything, to appear. Meanwhile, Kiran stood at the edge of the camp, glancing around, confused. He fidgeted, trying to convince himself.
Maybe he just wandered off.
But deep down, they all knew. Something was terribly wrong. The forest was silent. No birds. No wind. It was as if the island itself was waiting, watching. It was late at night, and the group sat around a small, flickering campfire. The flames danced and made their shadows stretch long and spooky on the ground. The dark forest around them felt like it was watching, with the trees standing tall and still. It was quiet, too quiet. The camp that once felt safe and fun now seemed scary and dangerous. Arjun knelt next to the fire, holding Nisha's flashlight in both hands. He stared at it, his eyes wide in shock, his mouth open like he wanted to speak but couldn't. His strong body was tense, frozen with fear, as if he didn't know what to do. Arjun's face, usually so brave, was pale, and sweat dripped down his forehead. He couldn't believe Nisha was gone. The flashlight's beam was still glowing faintly, pointing toward the forest, but it showed nothing. Priya sat nearby on a log, hugging her knees tight. She was shaking, her eyes darting around, filled with panic. She wanted to cry but held it back, too scared to let her tears fall. Her long, brown hair was messy, and her face looked so small and afraid. Her hands trembled, and even though she wore warm clothes, the fear she felt made her feel cold. Kiran stood a little away from the fire. His face was as white as a ghost, his brown eyes wide with fear.
She was just here. Wait.
His feet wouldn't move. His hands hung by his sides, not knowing what to do. His hoodie was still up over his head, but nothing could hide how scared he was. Nisha's chair sat empty, too close to the fire, and her flashlight lay on the ground. The moon was a tiny crescent in the sky, but its light wasn't enough to make the campsite feel safe. The wind made the flames flicker, and shadows moved, making it seem like something was lurking in the trees. The only sound was the soft crackle of the fire, but even that felt too loud in the eerie silence. They all sat there, waiting, listening, afraid to even breathe. What had happened to Nisha? Where did she go? And what was hiding in the shadows of the forest? It was late at night, and everything felt scary. The dark forest ahead was full of tall, twisted trees and thick bushes. There was no clear path, just shadows everywhere. What had happened to Nisha? Where did she go? And what was hiding in the shadows of the forest? It was late at night, and everything felt scary. The dark forest ahead was full of tall, twisted trees and thick bushes. There was no clear path, just shadows everywhere. The wind made the leaves rustle, and it sounded like the trees were whispering, as if they were alive. The campfire behind them flickered in the distance, but its light was faint and far away now. Priya ran toward the forest, her heart pounding. She thought she could hear Nisha's voice calling her from deep in the woods. Her brown eyes were wide with worry, and she shouted, "Nisha!" Her voice was shaky, like she might cry. Her long hair flew behind her, and her pink scarf flapped in the wind. Suddenly, her scarf got caught on a low branch, but she didn't stop. She was determined to find her friend, no matter how scary the forest seemed. Arjun, just behind Priya, reached out with his hand. His face was filled with fear.
She was just here, Priya. Wait!
Wide with fear. He glanced back at the campfire, then back at Priya. He didn't know what to do. Should he stay safe by the fire, or run after Priya? His body was stiff, his arms hanging by his sides, unsure of what to do next. He was scared, really scared. The forest ahead looked even darker now. The trees seemed to lean in, like they were watching. The wind whispered again, and the shadows looked like they were hiding something. Priya's scarf fluttered in the wind, stuck on the branch, as she ran deeper into the forest. The air was cold and quiet, too quiet, except for the wind and the distant crackling of the campfire. What was waiting for them in the shadows? It was late at night, and the cave was dark, cold, and scary. Arjun and Kunal had taken shelter inside, but the cave didn't feel safe. A small fire flickered near the entrance, casting shadows on the jagged rock walls, making the place look even more creepy. The deeper parts of the cave were completely black, with no light at all. Arjun sat by the entrance, his body tired and weak. He looked exhausted and afraid. His face was pale, his eyes wide with worry as he watched Kunal run deeper into the cave. Arjun reached out toward Kiran, trying to stop him, but his voice didn't come out. His mouth was open, but he was too scared to speak. Sweat dripped down his face, shining in the flickering light of the fire. His hands trembled as he reached out, fear and hopelessness filling his eyes. He looked like someone who had lost all his friends, and he was scared of what might happen next. Kiran, on the other hand, was running into the darkness. He could hear what he thought was Nisha's voice, calling him from deep inside the cave. His face was a mix of hope and terror. His eyes were wide, and his lips curled up in a strange, desperate smile. He really believed he had found her, even though the darkness ahead was so dangerous. His black hoodie was pulled tightly around him, and his pajama pants were dirty from the cave floor. He ran, arms stretched out, chasing what he thought was Nisha's voice. But he didn't see the danger, only the hope of finding his friend. The cave felt alive. The fire only lit up a small area, and beyond that, everything was black. It was early morning, and the sky was painted with soft colors, pink, orange, and light yellow, as the sun slowly rose in the distance. The water was calm, gently rippling as Arjun rowed his small boat away from the island. The island, far behind him now, looked dark and scary, with tall trees and thick forests standing like shadows against the brightening sky. Arjun sat in the boat, tired and sad. His body was slouched forward, his arms heavy as he gripped the oars. His face was dirty, his eyes filled with deep sadness. He had been through so much, and now he was leaving the island, but leaving felt hard. His friends were no longer with him, and his heart ached with sorrow. His dark brown hair was messy, and his clothes were torn and dirty from everything that had happened on the island. Every stroke of the oars seemed slow, each one filled with his grief. On the shore, 4 ghostly shadows stood silently. They were his friends, Priya, Nisha, Varun, and Kiran, but they didn't look the same. They were just silhouettes, standing still in the mist that hovered over the island's edge. They looked like shadows, blending into the fog, their faces hidden and their bodies faint, as if they were part of the mist itself. They didn't say anything, didn't move. They just stood there, watching as Arjun's boat drifted farther away. The sun's golden light started to spread across the water, making everything look calm and peaceful. But the island stayed dark and misty. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, but the island itself felt quiet, like a place full of secrets. The mist swirled softly around the shore, making the shadows of his friends seem even more ghostly. As Arjun rowed away, the island grew smaller and smaller, but the sadness stayed heavy in the air. The quiet sound of the boat on the water echoed in the stillness, and Arjun knew he was leaving his friends behind forever. The sky was slowly waking up, painted with soft colors of pink, orange, and purple. The sun was just starting to rise over the horizon. The water below was so calm, like a mirror, reflecting the beautiful colors of the sky. The water was still and calm, but the air felt heavy with sadness. The boat moved quietly across the surface, each dip of the oars making a soft splash. The sunrise was beautiful, but something didn't feel right. It was peaceful, yet unnerving, as if the island had secrets that would never be known.